Start now. Sorry we're a little bit late. So hello and welcome to the IFSTAL public lecture. I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to SOAS this evening for our annual public lecture as we begin year 9 of our IFSTAL programme. And it's wonderful to be hosting it here in SOAS, one of our founding university partners. SOAS has a long history of interest and involvement in teaching and research of food and in many related topics. Our Anthropology of Food MA has been running since the mid-80s, and I'm very pleased to say that many of our SOAS students have contributed to and benefited from IFSTAL for many years. This evening, we're very pleased to welcome our speakers, our first being John Ingram, who will briefly introduce the work of the ECI Research Group and open the conversation on food systems transformation. He'll be followed by Duncan Williamson from Forum of the Future and Sarah Nakera from another IFSTAL founding partner institution, the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. John is an associate professor and a senior research fellow at Somerville College, University of Oxford. In addition to leading the Food Systems Transformation Research Group within Oxford's Environmental Change Institute, he also leads our multi-university, postgraduate interdisciplinary food systems teaching and learning, as you know, IFSTAL. He also runs the Bean Meals programme and co-leads the Foresight for Food and Food System Impact Valuation programmes. If that's not enough, he's also coordinated the Global Food Security 2016-2021 £15 million Resilience in the UK Food System programme. Thank you, John. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Annabelle, and good evening to friends who've just joined us. As you gather, this is the launch of IFSTAL Year 9, and we like to start the year off with a lecture where we invite members of the general public, and it's very nice to see you all come to join the student cohort, who we hope will be hanging on and working through the IFSTAL year with us over the academe. So what I thought I'd do is just share a few thoughts about the work we do and how we support the IFSTAL programme by some of the thinking that we engage in. So I just thought I'd share a title with you. There's a very commonly heard phrase now: we have to transform the food system. What I'm going to do is just try and unpack that a little bit, and I'd be very interested in your opinion of what I have to say. Not everybody agrees with it, but that's good. So, if we just start with our work in Oxford, the Food System Transformation Programme, essentially we're interested in how the system works as a system. It comprises many disciplines: agriculture, marketing, transport, logistics, economics, etc., 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 health. And what we try and do is provide a framework that allows the disciplines to interact most effectively together to address a higher order challenge. We work with a very wide range of types of stakeholder. Often it's deemed to be monocentric government, that is, but we're equally interested in the governance and government and the process of policy formulation in the private sector, in the NGO and civil society organisations, and of course in academia. So there's a wide range of people we involve with, but the principal purpose is to help our colleagues develop and implement, as we say, enhanced food system policy and practice. To do that, we undertake research. Down along the bottom, there's a whole bunch of acronyms of some of our current projects. There are more just recently, actually. But the principal work we do is a combination of research. We are a research institution at Oxford, and it's also a teaching institution. And the IFSTAL programme is very much a manifestation of the way we like to engage with students and help them understand and learn to navigate the complexities of the food system, with a view to helping students move through the university period but into the world of work if they wish to stay in the food sector. So very much interested in research and teaching about the food system outcomes. Now, before some of our colleagues joined more recently, I was just sharing a few thoughts about the way we conceive of the food system, the notion of food system activities and food system outcomes. We've got another issue to think about, which is what do we actually want from our food systems? Food security writ large is obviously at the top of the list for many people, often broken down into these three major components, of which stability is a fourth component, or is it actually an attribute of the other three? The notion of sustainability is writ large, and agency. But from our thinking, the food system is actually contributing very much more to society than just food. You think of all the things we get from the food system and then the impact the food system has on many things we hold dear. And you can add your own words to the list, you can reverse the order, you can do what you like, but the fact is the food system is such a fundamental part of society. It's much more than just what we eat. So the challenge we have is how to balance our interests. At the top of the slide, you see a set of these food system activities, as we call them, from primary production through processing, transport, logistics, consuming, a very obvious food system activity in which we all engage, which gives rise to food security to lesser or greater extents. But these activities also give rise to a whole host of other socioeconomic aspects, principally livelihoods. Everybody who's involved in that diagram, perhaps except for us as consumers, essentially has a job and a livelihood, which is very much part of how the system works, and the system would not work without them undertaking their job. But there are also the environmental outcomes of the way our food system has emerged over the last century, perhaps, but argue many thousands of years, perhaps, but particularly peaking over the last 50, 60 years, with massive issues to do with climate change forcing, water availability, biodiversity loss, etc., etc. So there's a lot of things to think about. What we need to be able to do better is to manage the trade-offs which are implicit in that diagram. Each of us in the room will have our own view of what we think we want out of the system. Depends where you are in the system, where you are in your career, etc., etc. But the fact is, it's going to be very difficult to satisfy everybody at 100%. So there's a trade-off discussion to be had, but we can reach for synergies. And so our interventions in the food system will hopefully be a little bit of a win-win. At least it will begin to balance up some of the points that we think are important. Depends on your worldview. Do you put animal welfare above child labour? Do you put clean river water above biodiversity in the Amazon? Whatever it is, there's going to be a discussion. And so what it really means is that we have the activities of what we do, and the outcomes is what we get. And what we need to do is try and understand the balance with what we want as society, along the bottom, with what we do, which are the activities, and hence what we get. Very simple language. The activities are what we do, the outcomes are what we get. It's not high-powered science language, it's just straight talking. However, it is a complex discussion. Now, I mentioned the call for food system transformation. This was given a huge boost by the UN Food System Summit a couple of years ago, where the strapline was, we need to transform the global food system. Now, you might think that's a very sensible thing to say. I don't disagree with it, but it doesn't actually tell me very much about who has to do what. It just says this is something that has to happen. And what I need is a bit more help on what I need to do. So a few years ago, we had this report from the Inter-Academy panel, require a radical transformation of the system. Yes, indeed. But what does that actually mean? What are we actually trying to transform? The system doesn't cut it for me. It's got to be better than that. And so my answer to my own question is the food system outcomes. We're trying to transform the current situation, state A, into state B. We want to transform the food system outcomes from less good to more good, however you wish to define that. So that's my answer to the question, what we're actually trying to transform. So now we have a goal. Examples. What have I got here? Poor diets to better balanced diets. So that's the outcome. The outcome of the food system is the diet we consume. Working conditions are outcomes of the food system. Poor working conditions to more fair. Current incidence of food crime reduced to a lower level. These are food system outcomes. These are things we get as a result of the way we undertake the food system activities. Again, you could add your list. Poor animal welfare to better animal welfare. That's something we can aim for. So we had another paper came out a couple of years ago from Patrick Webb and many others, big piece in Nature Food, where they made this point: the urgency of food system transformation is now irrefutable. This was a couple of years ago. And what they went on to say is that to achieve this transformation, it's actually going to require a major shift in mindset. So this is to displace and discard the status quo of the food system outcomes and accept a different balance in that set. This is where the negotiation will begin to kick in. Now, what this is meaning is we need to shift our expectations from what we're currently getting, less good, to what we want to get, more good. So that means we have to change our expectation of what we want out of the system. That is uncomfortable. For many people, it could be very comfortable because they want a better deal. But for those of us who are very comfy, thank you very much, do we want it disrupted? That's the conversation. So who has to do what to actually transform the food system outcomes? So here we have our food system outcomes, the socioeconomic outcomes, the food security, environment, health, and all the other things that we get down there. And that's the goal. We're trying to transform the outcomes. But they don't just spontaneously transform. They only transform if we adapt the activities. So that means do the doing words differently, farming differently, processing food differently, consuming differently, all of those things, shipping food around the world differently. We need to adapt the activities in order to transform the outcomes. So that's all very well. But we, the food system actors, the people who are undertaking those activities, don't just spontaneously do something differently. We respond to what I call a signal. And the signal can be an opportunity or a threat. It can be a new business opportunity, which means I reposition the way I organize my shop or whatever it is. It can be a threat, a piece of legislation coming down the track about sugar tax. It could be an awareness of overconsumption of high sugar, fat, salt food leading to my poor ill health. Those are signals. And those are things that the actors will respond to. So, how do we manage the signals? What are the signals? The signals are a combination of the policies set by any organisation, not just government, but the policy of the food industry, the policy of civil society organisations, whatever it is, interacting with the context in which those policies are set and in which the system operates. What is the economic context? What is the environmental context? What are some of these other contexts? So that's all very well. So we get a signal, we adapt our activity in order to aim for an enhanced food system outcome. But that automatically means that we are actually altering the context because we have a new situation because of our adapted activity. And here we go round and round and round. This is because it is a dynamic system. And it's really important to recognize that any intervention can produce a positive benefit to some aspects, and it might produce a negative aspect, a negative implication to some other aspects. It just depends what's on the table. So how do we handle this? Well, this means that the policies have to be continually reassessed because we are working in a dynamic system. And one of the challenges for policy formulation is A, not knowing what's coming down the track, and B, only having history and trend analysis to work on. So what we're trying to do is develop a better system for handling the food dynamic, and this is very much what the IFSTAL program is all about. So it really starts with the question, what outcomes are acceptable? And this is the web paper, The Shift in Mindset. How do we as society decide what is acceptable? For whom? From whose perspective? Is it what I think's important for you or what you think's important for you? By when? All of those sorts of questions crop up immediately. So we've got to first of all agree what we're aiming for, and then we have to adapt our activities so that we transform the food system outcomes from the status quo to that better set that we have already agreed. Huge amount of conversation needed. It's not simple, but the point about the IFSTAL program is it's providing people who engage in the food sector with the capability to navigate that complexity. So if we want a major transformation of the food system outcomes, we're going to have a pretty radical set of adaptations. We're going to have to do things a lot differently. If we're happy with just tweaking something, the adaptation hasn't got to be so major. But there is a direct relationship between the amount of transformation we seek and the effort we'll have to put in to adapting our activities. And that needs negotiation. Because as I say, with any intervention, there are winners and losers. And the winner is normally the thing you hold dear in your plan. You think, if I do this, it's going to be fantastic. But what we forget is that it might not be fantastic for somebody over there because they are actually responsible for river quality or something. And it's understanding these feedbacks, what the feed forwards and the feedbacks across the landscape that are the set of outcomes, the environment, the social welfare, the food security, etc., that we need to unravel. The negotiation needs to take place. And that means we need people who are skilled with the ability to navigate that complexity. That's really what we are trying to do with the IFSTAL programme. I hope that's food for thought. Again, there is a discourse about what does food system transformation mean. I'm part of that discussion. Theorists would say, well, we're not really talking about the outcomes, we're talking about the interrelationships within the components in the system. That's what I call the activities. Adapt the activities to transform the outcomes. So very happy to have that discussion over a glass of wine later on if you wish. But for now, I think we better move on to the important part of the evening.
Thank you very much, John.
You go ahead. That's fine, you start. I'll just get the next
Thank
one.
you, John. I'd now like to invite and introduce our second speaker, Duncan. Duncan has over 25 years of experience working in the climate change, water and conservation sectors. He's set up and managed programs on freshwater, climate, sustainable diets and food systems for the WWF, UK and international, Compassion in World Farming and Action Against Hunger. Alongside his current role as Global Strategy Lead for Food Forum of the Future, Duncan is also Lead Advisor for Sustainable Gastronomy for the Barilla Foundation and Climate Smart Chefs Programme, and the Chair of Eating Better. I thank you, Duncan, for making the time to come and talk to us this evening.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me, to be honest. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's quite hard to follow John, so I'm going to do my best. I've been asked to focus on the UK food system. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at the UK food system. I'm going to explain where we are, where I see where we are. It's quite bleak, and I apologise for that. It's not my fault, but it is quite bleak. I'm then going to look at where we need to get to, which is really nice, really positive. And then I'm going to try and talk about some of the steps in the middle that we need to get there. But the first thing I am really, really optimistic. I'm not as sort of, if you asked me 4 years ago, I was quite depressed. I'd seen the state of nature, seen climate change. I was like, oh. But then I come to events like this and see so many people involved. It's really exciting. When I first started working on food systems, there was no one. We wouldn't have been able to have this event. So it's really good that so many people are getting it and so many people are going to take the work forward and really start doing the changes we need. But the first thing I've sort of noticed when it comes to food is that a lot of people talk about food systems and say the food system is broken. It's not. The food system is doing exactly what it's meant to do. The food system is really, really, really efficient. It's very fragile, it's very vulnerable, but the food system has been set up to deliver the food it's doing to make a lot of money for some particular sectors based on very, very few crops and livestock species. And you look at it, during the pandemic and now, retailers made record profits. Some of the biggest companies in the world made record profits, Monsanto, Cargill, all of that. So the food system is doing a brilliant job at what it does well. And we should learn from that because that's something we need to recognise, but it is deeply, deeply fragile. It's also a system that's relying on government. So the UK government has at least 14 departments responsible for food, some part of food policy. They're not joined up, but there's 14 departments, and sometimes they say completely different things. And I remember when I first started working on sustainable diets, I went to DEFRA, Department of Environment, and said, what are you doing on sustainable diets? And they went, you said diet. Okay, could you go to Department of Health? So I went to Department of Health and said, I'm working on sustainable diets. What are you doing on sustainable diets? And they went, you said sustainable. Go to talk to DEFRA. That went on for 5 years. And they would never, ever talk about it with me. We've also got a food system which is built on subsidies. The subsidies are immoral. They're massive. It's the second most subsidised system in the world. Our taxpayers' money goes to subsidise a food system which is massively destroying our health and the health of the planet. And that is crazy. So if anyone says we can't afford to do it, we can. And then the other part of this we need to look at is in the UK, most farmers don't get a living wage. They're some of the poorest people in the country. They earn some of the lowest wages. And the farmers I know, and I come from farming background, they are the hardest working people you'll ever meet, other than perhaps potentially teachers, nurses, other people who are actually really badly paid. But they work really, really hard, and they don't get paid for it, and they don't get respect for it, and they're villainised in the press. So when we look at what's happening with the UK system at the moment, we know how fragile it is. We saw under COVID the empty shelves. It happened really quickly. We panic bought, we forgot about food, and then people, after they panic bought, there were pictures of people throwing the food away. Food waste bins full of bags of unopened potatoes, loaves and loaves of bread, tinned food, people just throwing it away because they bought too much and panicked. So there's a bit of an education problem we have around food. But we also have a system where we're not really growing that much in the United Kingdom. Only about 50% of our food is grown from this country. And we import 80% of our fruit. More land is put aside for golf courses than for orchards, which is ridiculous considering how few people play golf, what a privileged sport it is. It's mainly white males of a certain age, mainly my friends, I will admit. But it's ridiculous that we've prioritised golf over food. And then you look at the food that we grow that we're almost self-sufficient in. It's wheat, it's barley, it's lamb, it's potatoes. It's not the most popular food other than potentially potatoes. We don't eat a lot of it. We just import lots and lots of food. And that's a bit of a worry. I think for me it's a worry because it's like, if we're importing it, what happens if it goes wrong? Where's this food coming from? And sometimes you learn about this food we're importing and the impacts it has. I mean, look at avocados. Everyone fell in love with them. And then we discovered most avocado farms had slave labour involved or were owned by gangs. So it's like, can't eat avocados. And we're importing them and we're offsetting our impacts to other countries. So, and this just-in-time food system is so fragile. We saw that with COVID. But there's always other things happening with the British food system at the moment. So we've had COVID. They predict another zoonotic disease at some stage. We've got Brexit. Whatever you feel about it, on whatever side of the debate you're on, it really has upset the apple cart with our food prices and what's happening to food and the imports and the legislation that's going. We have a cost of living crisis as well. We know that's happening. It's in the paper every single day. Food prices went up with inflation. And then you have the broader picture, the environmental impact. So we know food is a massive contributor to climate change. We know its livestock is a really big part of it. It's not just the actual sort of the current emissions, it's historic emissions. We have to recognise that. It's also things like your feed and the whole supply chain is part of this. It's also a food system that in the UK we cause loads of water pollution. One of the biggest causes of water pollution comes from the food system, whether it's spraying on the land or from industrial chicken plants in the River Wye. One of the biggest causes of air pollution in the UK, food and food systems. So it's everywhere. And the UK is the most biodiverse, depleted country in Europe, and I think it's the 8th or 9th in the world. Mainly due to the food system. Not just, we did chop down some trees so we could build ships and build a colony, colonising the world, but we also then chopped down trees and put sheep on it or made it into plants. And that really hasn't turned around. Our biodiversity, we've only got 8% of our natural biodiversity left. It's really worrying, and we all know you go outside now, there's a lot less sort of insects buzzing around than they were when we were younger. And when I was younger, there was a lot more insects going around. Coupled with that as well, we also have an obesity epidemic. It's global, but in the UK, we're getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And you're having this weird thing where people are putting on weight, getting fatter and fatter and fatter, but they're also getting more and more nutrient deficient. So you're having the double burden of malnutrition going on there, because the average diet in the UK eats between 60 and 80% ultra-processed foods. And they can occasionally be good, but let's face it, breakfast cereal didn't do anyone any good. And it's an ultra-processed food. So ultra-processed foods themselves, they're dominating our diet because we're time poor. But, okay, if we're time poor, the average British person spends 5 hours a day online, on social media or streaming platforms, watching television. We're not time poor, we've deprioritised food. It's very different. And there is opportunities to do that. And then we've got these other issues that are going on. We have the access to food. There's food deserts. I could go on for ages about this, but I don't have time. So what we know, there's a really interesting paper that came out this week or last week, where this whole food system is so fragile, so vulnerable, that they're predicting civil unrest within 10 to 15 years as a result of it, either because there will be insufficient food, primarily because of trade routes collapsing, climate change, etc., or food distribution networks will fail. And what they're saying is it is quite likely this will happen at some stage, and we are seeing harvests fail all around the world. And there's all kinds of things that could cause it. It could be protectionism from other countries not exporting food. It could be because we don't have the workers to grow the food or pick the food or manufacture the food anymore. Could be because climate change is really kicking in and it's really impacting on stuff. So it could even be, I heard one of the answers, it could be AI has finally risen up, taken over, and that's it. It's all gone wrong. So that's kind of where we are. It's not a particularly pretty picture. However, where we want to get to, I think, is really nice. So we know where we want to get to. That is really positive. We want a just and regenerative set of food systems. It has to be just and regenerative. It has to work for people, has to work for planet, it has to work for animals. It's like the One Health picture. It must be just and regenerative. This food system we can get to will restore nature. It will restore ecosystems. It will bend the curve and bring biodiversity back. That is really, really within our grasp. We can start doing that within this year if we really, really wanted to. We can have a food system that keeps us within 1.5 degrees and helps us go below 1.5 degrees if we have a really good regenerative, restorative food system. We can have a food system where we pay the true cost of food, because we don't at the moment. A food system that is built where you understand the ecosystem services, you understand the benefits to health, you understand how it sort of can purify the air, you understand everything. You eliminate subsidies from the food system, so suddenly this piece of industrial produced meat or this box of chocolate frosted sugar bombs or whatever it is you're eating for breakfast is really expensive. And the healthier, more natural, the whole foods are a lot more affordable, and they have less impact on the environment. That will change it all, and we could move towards that. There's some brilliant work that's gone on with that. We'll have a food system where we are just eating more fruit and vegetables. We are finally going beyond the fact that they're boring, and we're eating them, we're celebrating, we're loving them. We are eating more beans. I really, really, really love beans. I think that beans are the most amazing thing on the planet. And I'm a vegetarian. I don't particularly like fake meat, but I love beans. Absolutely have. And I've been a vegetarian for 40 years, and yeah, I've always celebrated them. We can have more equitable supply chains. We can make sure that the money doesn't all go to retailers and a few people and a few big corporations. The manufacturers get paid, the local entrepreneurs get paid, farmers get a really good wage, farming communities get a really good wage. And this food system will probably be more affordable to the average person, not just in their shopping bills, but it'll help them because you'll be healthier. You'll have better diets. Better diets mean you probably will be sort of achieve more at work. Your education attainment will go up. So this is where we can. It'll be a more diverse food system. And it's a food system that, this is my personal one, is that it will be built on one of the things that every single person will eat 30 plants a week. That's fruit, vegetables, beans, spices, herbs, 30 plants a week. That's what it'll be based on. It'll be a really exciting system. So how do we get there? Well, there's roles for everyone. First of all, government. So when you talk to government, they go, oh, we can't tell people what to eat, it's nanny statism. Oh, that's terrible. But like I said earlier, They already control every part of your diet in the UK. But we have a government which is a really bad nanny. It's the nanny that's left the kid in the rain. It's that bad. It's a terrible nanny. We want a government, every part of your eating decision the government is involved in, from taxes, procurement, farming, planning, health advice, education, the government is involved in it. So we want the government to become a good nanny. We want Mary Poppins. And the government can do that. So when the government says, oh, nanny statism, you should go, yes, do it. We want it. Just do your job properly. We want to work with producers. They're amazing people. They need to be celebrated. They're not the villains, they're the heroes. They're absolutely amazing. So work with producers. Buy food from producers. Try to understand what they're going through. Create demand. They respond to demand. They respond to financial indicators. So they're brilliant. So work with producers. Let's try and get more money down to them. I really think that's important. Businesses. Well, businesses need to step up. Some are stepping up to the plate. We're seeing some of them going, we recognise our business model is deeply, deeply fragile and vulnerable, so we have to change. And some of them are, some that you wouldn't believe, some of the so-called baddies are doing it, but also some of them are not. And that's what, as roles as citizens, we can hold them to account. If you've said you're going to do this, do it. Why not? And then if they don't shop there. As citizens, every time you buy food, you are empowered to make a choice and make a difference. So do it. Buy food. Don't fall into the horrible situation where we've got lots of camps where people go, oh, you have all these tribes around food. Oh, you must eat meat. You must do the keto diet. You must go vegan. You must. That tribalism is not helpful. Respect other people's choices, and we all should move to sustainable food systems. However we do it, as long as it's culturally appropriate, that's fine. If it's food you like, food you eat, brilliant. We can all stop wasting food. Stop wasting. It's an absolute disgrace that we're still on average wasting 30% of the food we buy per person. Everyone's doing that. That would be me like sort of giving you sort of £100 and then you go, thank you very much, and getting £33 of that, ripping it up and putting it in the bin. You wouldn't do that, but we're doing that with food. And then look at local solutions. I really think there's local solutions for these bigger problems. And if you can, shop locally, it's brilliant. I'm not saying the food has to come from local, it should be seasonal, but it can come from anywhere. But support local shopkeepers, work with them, support local farmers. I really do think local opportunities will make some of the changes, and it doesn't have to be more expensive. So change is happening. I'm really positive about it. I'm really excited about what's going on at the moment. And the one thing I'll leave you with is that, if nothing else, when you go home tonight, try and name 30 plants. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. That was very inspiring. I feel like I want to go back to the garden now. With Mary Poppins, of course, with her umbrella. So thank you. I'd like to invite Sarah, our third speaker for this evening. Sarah is researching the role of novel plant-based foods to transitioning towards more nutritious, affordable and sustainable diets in the UK. Prior to this, Sarah was based at the UN Food and Agricultural Organization for 5 years, working across different divisions in various food-related topics, including food composition, pesticides, maximum residue limits, the role of pesticides and microplastics in the human gut microbiome, and the effects of climate change on nutrition and biodiversity. Sounds like you were running from one department to the other. So thank you for coming and welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to share the stage with John and Duncan. And my talk might not be as funny as Duncan's. But today what I'm going to talk about is healthy, sustainable and resilient food systems, but I'll give you a global perspective. So just to give you a bit of an overview, I will first start giving you and talking about the complex linkages between climate change, agriculture, nutrition and health. Then we will follow with some solutions and additional considerations. So we will talk a bit about exploring some of the advantages and the drawbacks of food system change. And finally, I'll talk a bit about the take-home message and what you guys can do and what role you play within it. So first, we will start talking about how climate change impacts food systems. And I hope that by now, I'll start talking about the apparent paradox. And I would like you guys to raise your hands, and I hope by now most of you probably have heard, but if you've heard about climate change, global warming, or extreme weather events, raise your hand. And it would be rare that we wouldn't know this. But this is the interesting and the apparent paradox, that despite the fact that we're constantly hearing about climate change and these impacts, we also see that our global population is thriving year after year. We have better health systems. We have managed many of the diseases that we couldn't use to live many, many years. We have managed to produce a lot of food to be able to feed the growing population. And this is the very interesting side that, and I'm pointing out this paper here, written by Sarah Whitney and colleagues, that they describe this aspect in a very nice way, where they show how we are sort of like improving year by year, but at the same time, we are using our resources to the limit. And a nice way to sort of like think about this is this framework that you can see here, that is the Planetary Boundaries Framework, which I assume that many of you have probably seen it. But the idea of this concept is that we should be using our resources to the Earth's limits, and this would be within the little green circle that you see there. But unfortunately, very recently, a study has mentioned that we've already crossed through 6 out of 9 of these planetary boundaries, which is very concerning. So to move on, I'll concentrate in this lecture particularly in the food systems, given the talk. And just so that you get an idea for those that are not aware of, what is a food system? And the Eat-Lancet Commission defined food systems as all the elements and activities that relate to production, processing, distribution, preparation, and consumption of food. So this means that our food system considers everything from farm to fork all the way to waste, but we also consider transport within it, research and development, and all the different nutrients and additives that we need to produce food. But the food system doesn't work on its own, and it actually stands along many different drivers. And the Centre for Food Policy and from City University of London, they actually delivered this very nice framework where you can see how all the different domains interact within our food system. For example, politics, economic, health. And for this specific presentation, I will concentrate particularly on health and environment, but I think it's very important that you guys understand where the food system sits within the global society. So we keep on hearing about climate change and that we will have temperature rises, more extreme weather conditions. And this is a nice figure to sort of understand how climate change impacts our crops and livestock. And there are many different ways. The most obvious ones, like for example, heat, that this will like change the yield content of products, will affect animal and their productivity, but it would also affect people's productivity because we will get hot and it would be really hard to work in the fields. And a very important one is CO2 concentration. This one, because we know that plants consume CO2, we would assume, oh, this is great because plants would grow actually faster. But in reality, this is not very good because now we're starting to notice that micronutrients are starting to dilute within the way that we are like growing the plants. So this means that per 100 grams of food, we would actually need more food to be able to have those micronutrients. And this is very concerning if we think on the global context of many countries with food insecurity, how this would be a very difficult situation. Then we have other indirect effects for climate change towards our food system, like water availability. There's many countries that are currently having many issues about water issues, and Duncan mentioned about the avocado situation. They require extreme amounts of water. There's other aspects like salinity and sea level rise that would affect our crop production, but then there's also the food safety aspect. With the weather pattern changes, we could get more pests. This is not only for crop production, but it could also happen during the storage side of food. We could have more levels of mycotoxin in many cereal crops, and we could also have soil fertility that would change it, and we could, and these would completely affect our crops. And finally, probably the less obvious one is the socioeconomic aspect, but they both interact with climate change and how we actually respond to it. And This one is very interesting because this, from one side, is food demand. The more people that we are, we will demand more things, but it's also how we demand and which things we demand. We need more resources for this. And then along with this is the dietary patterns, which we've seen over the years from country to country. Dietary patterns are changing and changing. And in the UK, you can see over the past years, we don't want more foods like the traditional foods that Duncan mentioned that we produce in the UK, but people want more exotic fruits that come from other tropical countries, which may cause other issues. And then there's also the trade. How do we respond with trade? What policies are we implementing with trade? Are we actually helping countries to get products that we actually need, but also protecting other countries, or just like extracting everything from the other countries and just leaving them basically with nothing? So these are like some of the interlinkages between these two groups. And of course, we're not sitting back and just like having the effects of climate change, but we are having a lot of different adaptation and mitigation strategies for agriculture. And within this, it's important to take into consideration how the different countries would respond to this, and based on their capacity to respond to it, we will either have crop and livestock productivity, or it would be completely the opposite, and countries would become very vulnerable. So now we will move into the other side. So this is like the other side of the coin, basically, and this is how food systems influence climate change. So it's a bidirectional way, just like John mentioned previously. And when we think about food systems and the way that we produce our food, we always come across greenhouse gas emissions. And as John mentioned previously, our food and agriculture sector, it produces around 20 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. But producing food doesn't entail this. It's also about land use, fresh water, which is very important because we also need fresh water. Eutrophication, which is actually ocean or freshwater pollution, and biodiversity that is generally overlooked. But as you can see on the red bits, these are like the concerning sides, particularly on the biodiversity side. And then when we moved into looking specifically what foods we actually eat, where they are produced and how they are produced, there is a significant different type of impact from one food to another one. And I know that I mentioned that it's not only about greenhouse gas emissions, but here I use an example for greenhouse gas emissions because it's just a nice way of showing how in this figure you can see all the different stages of the food system and the impact per food of greenhouse gas emissions. And here you can see that animal products or even coffee or chocolate, they have a much higher impact than other foods that we consume a lot less, like pulses, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds. And as you can see in this figure, generally most of the impact, particularly on greenhouse gas emissions, comes from land use and from the farming processes. So what we eat is like really, really important, and where we source it and how we source it. And then there's an additional stress to climate change, and this is our global population. Just last year, the National Geographic mentioned that we reached the 8,000 billion people, and we're projected to be 10,000 billion in 2050. And you can see all the different projections, but it doesn't really matter how high or how low this goes. The fact is that it's increasing. And if we get more people in our world, we will need more resources. And the important point here is that even though we all moved into like eating better products, let's say with less greenhouse gas emissions, not consuming so much water, we will still need resources, and having this population will cause extreme pressure to the environment. And within this, there's also dietary change. So high-income countries, they are generally those countries that consume a lot of animal products. And despite the fact that there's so many strategies and efforts to reduce this, there is also this dietary change and transition that is happening in lower and middle income countries. And I like to reflect this with this picture in a country like India, that is a country that the population is increasing. And despite the fact that they have traditionally plant-based diets, there is a clear change of their diet to start eating more animal products, for example. And you can also see like these fast food outlets, like McDonald's, which are just in these settings, which is not great to have it, and changing the direction of the discourse. And finally, food systems is not delivering on the health front. Just like our previous speakers mentioned, the way that we eat, and this is almost globally, is not delivering on our health. We have many non-communicable diseases, more obese people, people with type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and the count goes on. And what is absolutely concerning at the moment is that until 2014, we were on this long run of reducing hunger levels around the world. But since 2014 and 15, there was a tipping point. And now actually the the crazy concern that we have at the moment is that if you look into this map, now we see this triple burden of malnutrition. And this means that you can see people with micronutrient deficiencies, either undernourished or also obese. And this can happen per country, this can happen per community, this can happen per the same household, and now we're even seeing within the same individual. So you can see all the different challenges that we're going through. So hopefully until here is not too depressing, but there are many solutions across the food system, but within these solutions there's many considerations in these nexus that we need to think of. So the most important one is that climate change will impact very differently from one country to another one, and the capacity to respond to them will be very different as well from one country to another one. So in the images on my left-hand side, this represents on the sort of higher income side, that they have more money to be able to invest in technology like drip irrigation or hydroponics. Drip irrigation where you control the amount of water that you put in a plant so you consume less water, or hydroponics that you control absolutely every aspect for your plants. But at the same time, as we have these countries that will be able to cope, there's these other countries, like the pictures on the right-hand side, that they will just have to rely on the environmental changes and the different droughts or rainfalls, increasing rainfalls. And these will extremely affect their crop production. And of course, these will just make it more challenging, making more inequalities across the different countries. So around the world, there are many different solutions across the food system. There's more and more people working towards reducing plastic, having different types of renewable energies, improving feed additives for agriculture, for livestock. But here I wanted to choose these two examples from the production side and also from the consumption side. So from the production side, we've sort of invested now in drip irrigation and hydroponics that I just mentioned. But then from the consumption side, we're also thinking about these novel alternatives, plant-based alternatives, to try to make people change their dietary patterns. And then we're also considering insects as an opportunity, which might not come from the higher income side, but more of more traditional diets. But the challenge within all these solutions and what we need to think of is who is actually doing this, from which country, does the country have the technology, and how are we going to make sure that we're actually bringing everybody into the food system stock, and it's not just having countries that have the money coping with climate change, and then the other ones, we don't know what will happen. So just to finalize, what role could you play in the food system? And I really like showing this image when I think about food systems, because it's like a puzzle, and we have so many different pieces. And here you can see on the left-hand side at the top climate change, but then there's so many different aspects, and all of them are interrelated, and we need to work together within all these different pieces to be able to transform our food system. And of course, as I mentioned, there's so many challenges, but at the same time, there's so many opportunities, and if we work together in a way that we can shift all these different things, then it'll be a lot easier. And the important thing is, while we do this, we need to think of all the benefits, but at the same time, we need to also try to think of all the co-harms. And in most cases, this might not be that we actually will know that this will happen, but this is why we need people that are trained in an interdisciplinary way, with people from different angles to actually identify all those different co-harms that maybe we actually never intended to do them, but is very important. So if you're interested in transforming the food system, I think IFSTAL is a great place to get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd now like to invite our speakers up to the stage. And once they've done that, we've got a few minutes for some questions. and I'll leave it to,
Yeah,
I'll go round with the...
Sure, all right,
the
thank
mic.
you, yeah. Well, thanks very much to both of you. We thought we'd just like to try and grab a few moments now to have a conversation about what we've heard. You've given us many things to think about. Something I'd like to put to you both is this issue of the demand curve. So you mentioned population, increased wealth and all the rest of it. How do you think we can manage? How do you think we can? How do you think we can better manage demand? Because the protectionist paradigm, written large in FAO, for instance, is how to ever meet demand. But really, the challenge now is how to turn the curve. What's your view on the opportunity to manage demand in using your diagram at the end?
Yeah, so I think my view on this is diversity. Diversity is key. I think when we think about like 2014 on the year of like quinoa, and I'm actually from Ecuador, and quinoa is a very traditional crop in Ecuador, and FAO decided to make the year of quinoa, and this exploded everywhere, and we actually now even produce it here in the UK. And I think when we get into these sort of like popular diets or like superfoods or these different terms that are actually not helpful, I think when it becomes in fashion is a problem. So I really think diversity is the key to manage demand.
So I've got two key things. One is I think it's education, and not just children, but adults. Adults need to be educated about food sustainability and what's going on, because when people know, they change. If they don't know, ignorance is bliss. They carry on doing what they're already doing. And the other is, I know it's unpopular at the moment, but I think regulation and taxes. We've tried being nice, tried to let the market sort itself out by voluntary initiatives. It's not working. I mean, it doesn't work in any sector. We know in automobiles, most cars being bought at the moment are SUVs, and we know they're planet killers and child killers. We know people are still flying more because it's so cheap, and this is happening around the world. It's not everyone, but the people who can afford it, particularly the middle classes. So we need to start regulating so that the bad is priced out of the system and the good can then be supported and made accessible to everyone.
Well, I like that phrase, price the bad out of the system. Who's going to object to that? And how do we handle the resistance? I mean, it's a wonderful utopian idea, but because there's always winners and losers, and where is the power in there? Where is the sort of power dynamic? Where is the political economy in that? So how would you address the losers in such an equation? What would you say to them?
So I don't think it's going to be as challenging as you think. We've got some countries that are already doing it. You look at, say, Chile, Mexico, they're starting to tax bad food and ultra-processed foods. They're doing a great job. You're seeing, yes, a lot of the narrative at the moment is dominated by this extreme right-wing populist, but they're a tiny minority. And what we're seeing is people all over the world under 45 are starting to call for this kind of change to happen. So people are calling for it, businesses are starting to adapt to it, and the people that are clinging on to the current system are very, very vocal. We know most of the media is owned by them, but they are a very small minority, and I think their day is numbered. So we've got to just keep going because the evidence is building. And if you also look at some of the things happening at local levels, there's so many wonderful things happening that people are starting to take it into their own hands to make the changes.
Yeah, I think it took a lot of effort in certain countries like Chile, for example, to start with sugar taxes, and that was actually very successful. But I think particularly talking about like meat and like dairy products, I think it's just a matter to having governments just doing what they are supposed to do, and of course education will help. But I think it's time to stop ignoring the elephant in the room and actually start approaching it.
One of the points I made in my short talk was the need to manage the signals. So the signals are what will cause us to change our behaviour. Nanny State, you've offered a plan of a stick as opposed to a carrot. The carrot is what?
The carrot is what? I mean,
I hate to say the carrot is it's a carrot. It is literally a carrot, but it's, I mean, this is why it amazes me it's not happening, because the carrot is our future. It's our kids. It's what our kids are going to do. It's giving farmers a good income. It's actually transforming a food system that's going to help people. But also, we know that it's going to cost the government less. When you make this transformation, it costs less in healthcare, costs less in subsidies. There's more money available. People who have a healthy diet are more productive. It's amazing.
You're referring to pounds, shillings, and pence in the old money, literally. What about the political currency and all of those challenges? This is another sort of field to navigate. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I actually think I think it's just like changing the view, and like I'm not very sure how much like the governments could do this aspect, but like there's generally this idea of like meat is great and like vegetables are just, you know, not great. But if you ask any vegans or vegetarians, I guess, that actually know how to cook them, they are quite amazing. So I think it's a matter of just teaching people how to make these other foods more appealing and more tasty and more exciting. And then it might help governments as well approach it in this way. But I think it's this, I don't know, when I arrived to the UK, and I apologize for those that cook this way, but they gave me like carrots boiled to almost kill everything in the carrot. Of course it's gonna be disgusting, whereas like if you roast it or make it in a really nice way, then it's a different story. So I think that's like a very important point that I think we often forget when we have this fight against meat versus vegetables or legumes.
And I'll just add as well, when we look at what's keeping the current system in place, a lot of it is around the lobbyists and, say, the farming lobby, and everyone goes, oh, the NFU, and the NFU are not particularly good. But you've got to remember that a lot of these lobby groups which feed into government, a lot of these think tanks which feed into government don't represent the industry. They represent a tiny group of self-interested parties. And there's a whole load of farming organisations that I speak to regularly that want to overturn this, and they want to lobby for this better system, and they're starting to work out how to do this, and you're seeing this across the board.
And you use the phrase education of adult children society. Labelling is often discussed as, you know, something that we ought to be taking more seriously, but there are the risk of so many different labels on something you don't really know where you are. I was once asked by some retailers what labels did I think was necessary, and I slightly bit my lip a little bit, but I said I think it only needs 3 labels. One of them's the price, because most people are interested in that. One of them is a label saying toxic after instead of best before. And the third one is a great big sticky red thing saying, do you really need to buy me? And of course they weren't happy. But in a way, that's what you're saying. You've got to kind of be more sensible about stuff. And how do we instill that good sense? And I liked your phrase, not time poor, but we've deprioritized food. I think that's a really salient point. How do we reprioritize food? What do you think?
Well, I think I come from a different angle because I'm from Latin America, so my food priorities are quite high. And I notice this a lot with my colleagues in the UK. Their food priorities are always eating in front of the screen. And I just think, and this is, I think, a conversation very much in like high income versus like lower income, I guess, that like in the higher income, because we're like constantly talking about time and like what we need to do next, it's like you've forgotten about food, I guess. Whereas like in the other countries, we still value like sitting with the family, eating on the table, even if you're alone, enjoying what you're actually eating. So I think it's maybe bringing those values back into like children, but potentially as well adults, and showing them how important it is to have your food and to actually enjoy the different textures and flavors. And I think that's a very important aspect within the moving towards more sustainable and healthy diets.
And I think it's also remembering how much pleasure food can give. It's when you have good food, it's wonderful. When you cook for other people, it's amazing, that feeling, whether it's your family or friends, or if someone is willing to give their time up to cook you dinner. It is absolutely amazing. Or going out for a meal with people. And I think we just need to remember that. And then also make a conscious decision to put your phone down. Are you really happy scrolling through your screen while eating your lunch or eating dinner? Are you just watching Netflix every night make people happy when they're eating the tea? Just take an hour a day to eat food. And if you're sitting with friends, like, it's a phone shouldn't even be out your pocket. And it's something that does break my heart when I go to a restaurant and I'll see sort of 8 people sitting having dinner and half of them are on their phone. It's just like, be in the moment, get your phone out later.
Right. And the other thing you were saying is you like beans. Yeah, we heard that a lot. I think we should probably wind up. Do you want any closing comment on the sort of the discussion about the role for education with the upcoming generation, the sorts of stuff IFSTAL's doing? I'm not looking for praise, I'm looking for critique.
Yeah, I actually think this is a really amazing opportunity that you guys have, because we actually discussed with Duncan, and Duncan actually mentioned it in his talk. When I started in my career, there was no linkages between food and environment, and food systems probably not even mentioned. And you guys are lucky enough that there's a program that is like willing to teach you from the basics all the way to the end to get your career within it if you want to, or just get the skills from it, which is a really amazing opportunity that I think neither of us had, and I think you should really appreciate and like consider it.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you just said, and I think it's a really exciting field to study, and it's a really exciting time to get into it. So if you're looking at it, do it, because it's not boring, to say the least.
Good, okay. Well, thanks very much, folks. Let's conclude there and say thank you to our speakers. And invite everybody, please, to come and join us for a glass of wine or glass of something else. And it's through there. So thank you for coming tonight.